41 years ago in Denton, Texas, there was a man by the name of Thomas B. Warren. He had a PhD from Vanderbilt University in philosophy, and he was debating a man by the name of Antony Flew. Antony Flew had a PhD from Reading University, and the remarkable thing about Antony Flew was that he was the world-recognized leading atheistic thinker. And what I mean by that is, Antony Flew had written a paper that he presented under the C.S. Lewis chaired Socratic Society at Oxford. He presented this paper, and when he did, I believe it was 1963 that he presented that paper. Don't quote me on that date, but after he presented that paper, it became the most widely read, most often published, most often written on atheistic philosophical paper for the last 6 decades. Still to this day. Hands down, far and away, he was recognized as the world's leading unbeliever. He wrote a book in 2006. On the front cover, you would read, "There is no God." And in this particular book, he explained that every single night of this 4-night debate, it was 2 hours every night, for 4 nights, 5,000 people gathered in the venue there in Denton, Texas, to listen to Thomas B. Warren, a member of the Lord's Church, debate Antony Flew, the world's leading atheistic thinker. Why would so many people do that? Why is the topic, "There is a God," such a powerful question to people? I think you and I both understand why that's the case, and I think you understand that this evening it's a Friday. It's Friday night. A lot of people doing a lot of stuff on a Friday night, aren't they? A lot of people out at their local bar, drinking, looking to have some kind of fun that way. A lot of people at their local football game for high school. A lot of people doing a lot of different things, and I dare say most Friday nights you're not sitting in a pew here in the church building. But you are tonight. Now, why is that? Because deep down, every human being desires to have a solid answer to the question, does God exist? And there's a reason for that, because it profoundly affects how you then behave. If you think there's not a God, well, that throws out any moral standard that allows you to behave in a way that you can feel like you're not guilty for any type of negative behavior, and you can then suggest that you are a product of blind random chance processes over multiplied millions of years, and you don't have to answer to anybody. If you're not believing that there is a supernatural, all-powerful God, then guess who is God? You. But if you do believe there's a God, then that means there's somebody bigger than you. It means there's a standard above you. It means you have responsibilities to that Creator, and it means that your life is going to be very different than if you didn't believe in God. Now, the question comes to us, which one is correct? Is there a God or is there not a God? Can we prove this? Can we validate it? Can we nail it down? Can we know for a fact the answer to this question? I'm here tonight to suggest to you that yes, you can know this for a fact. There should be no reason when you walk out of the doors tonight that you don't know for an absolute positive fact, just as sure as you know your name, the answer to the question, is there a God? You can know it. And that's what we're going to work on this evening. How can you know the answer to the question, is there a God? Maybe you have heard the atheistic proposition, the proposition of unbelief. Atheism comes from the Greek word a, which means no, theos or theos, which means God. Atheism means no God. It's simply the position that says there is nothing more than matter. In 1928, a man by the name of Charles Smith summed it up for us in this quote, "In the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba, and the amoeba begot the worm, and the worm begot the fish, and the fish begot the amphibian begot the reptile begot the lower mammal begot the lemur begot the monkey begot the man who imagined God." This is the genealogy of man. There has been lots of work done on that particular idea. Supposedly, 13.82 billion years ago, there was a tiny something that's called a singularity that exploded in what scientists now refer to as the Big Bang. After that 13.82 billion years ago explosion, supposedly everything in the universe was hydrogen, only hydrogen atoms that started to expand, and they started to coalesce and form into stars. Those stars supposedly started to cook the elements, and then they would explode, and those elements eventually found their way into coalescing into planets like planet Earth. Supposedly about 4.5 billion years ago, Earth had coalesced around the sun, and life formed on the surface of that earth from non-living inorganic chemicals. That's the idea of atheism, that there was no God in the beginning, nothing supernatural, that matter is all that there is. Right now, about 7% of the population would adhere to that idea. 7% in the United States of America of the adult population, that's going to give you about 22 million people. At the present, in the United States of America, more people do not believe in God than any time in the history of the U.S. 22 million people. If you were to drive through Alabama and you stop in Birmingham, Alabama on a Friday night, it feels like there are about 5 million people and all of them own 3 cars and they're somehow all driving them at once, but there are only about 1 million people in Birmingham, Alabama. If you were to take Birmingham, Alabama and multiply it by 22 and every single person in it was an adult unbeliever, then you would have the number of atheists and agnostics that we have in the United States of America today. And from the stats that we can see, it's the fastest growing religion in the country. Now, there's another idea. I'd say you're fairly familiar with it too. It goes something like this: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God divided the light from the dark, and the light He called day, the dark He called night, and evening and morning, day 1. Subsequently, day 2, God creates the expanse, the firmament, the sky. Day 3, God creates the grass and trees. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, birds and fish. Day 6, animals and man, stopping His creative activity on the 7th day. Ultimately, that's your 2 options. Matter is all there is, or there's a supernatural God. Now, what we need to get out of the way is the idea that you have been told that the idea of creation is unscientific. That's what you're told in most of your science textbooks or most of the discussions on creation and evolution. And here's why they say to you that creation is unscientific, because they say that science deals with things that you can touch, see, taste, hear, or smell. And if you're going to say that there is a God, then you would have to be able to touch, see, taste, hear, or smell God. And if you can't touch, see, taste, hear, or smell God, then God is unscientific. That's false. That has never been what science is. In fact, science has always been the search for truth. And there are many things that you can know without ever having seen certain aspects of that. Now, let's think about that very simply. You're on a beach. You look down and you start to see some footprints. Those footprints are spaced at a certain distance from each other. They're a certain depth in the sand. They're going a certain direction. You look to see who made the footprints and you don't see the person. Now, according to the idea that creation is unscientific, what you would have to say then is no one made the footprints because we can't see anyone who made them. Now, you see how absurd that is. Can we know something about the person who made the footprints even though we've never seen them? Well, yeah, let's just analyze the footprint for a second. How many toe prints are there? 5. So how many toes does the person have? Well, you didn't see the person's foot. How can you know how many toes the person had? Because you see the print. Now, how tall was the person? If you knew enough about gait studies, how a person walks, you could understand by calculating the distance between the footprints. You could see that they have 2 feet. They have a heel and an arch. They are a certain distance away from each other, so they're a certain height. We might not know exactly to the centimeter, but we could give you a roundabout figure. Depending on how far the imprint was impressed in the sand, we would know approximately how much the person weighed. And yet we've never seen the person, have we? You see, the idea that somehow you can only come to knowledge based on something that you can touch, see, taste, or smell, that's simply not true. In forensic science, people use the idea of indirect observation all the time. They come to a crime scene and they're trying to find a criminal. Do they look around and say, you know what, no criminal here, I guess there's not one? They would never do that. What do they look at? The things which they can see. And they look at the things which they can see, and they learn something about what they can't see. So you come to the crime scene and you start to find a chewing gum wrapper, or you find a person's fingerprint, or you find a person's DNA, or you find a person's hair that was left at the scene, and you can know what color hair they have. You can know what their genetic makeup is. You can know what kind of chewing gum they chew, or what kind of any number of things, what kind of coat they're wearing, because you find the fabric off their coat, but you've never seen the person. So do you mean to tell me that we can't know anything about that criminal because we can't touch, see, taste, or smell the criminal? No, you can look at the things that you can see and come to a very clear understanding of what you can't see. Now, I put it in scientific terms first, and then I'm going to give it to you in scriptural terms. If you were to go to Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, you would read that almost verbatim. For since creation, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. So we need to ask ourselves a simple question. Is there anything that we can look at here in this world that will tell us something about a creator who is not of this world? And when we start to analyze that, even from a scientific perspective, we realize that, yeah, there are some very good things that you can learn and study and know. And let me tell you what I'm not going to do tonight. If you want to make the case for the existence of God, you could go to the Bible, talk about how the Bible's inspired. It contains characteristics that are superhuman, that no human could have devised, and you could use that then as evidence to prove God's existence. You don't need to do that. You could, if you wanted to. It'd be kind of a roundabout way, but you don't need to. You can look at the natural world and come to a correct conclusion about God without ever touching or seeing a Bible. Now, you would need a Bible to explain to you God's plan of salvation for man. But if we're just trying to answer the question of, does God exist? You wouldn't need a Bible to do that. In fact, the Bible explains to you that you don't need a Bible to do it. I'm not going to give you very much scripture tonight, but I'll tell you what I am going to give you: evidence that validates a singular conclusion. We're going to start with science. We're going to start with the most fundamental law of science in the world. It's the law of science that's used in every single scientific experiment that you've ever seen, you've ever heard. It's called the law of cause and effect. Now, you use it every day of your life, because if you didn't use it, you wouldn't be able to pull up the handle of a truck door and get in, because you wouldn't know that pulling up the handle of the truck door would cause that door to open. You wouldn't know that turning the key to the truck would cause the truck to come on. It's the most fundamental law of science in the world. Now, you know what a law is. A law of science is something that there's never been an exception to ever in the history of science. If you ever find an exception to the law of cause and effect, what does that make the law of cause and effect? No longer law. You can call it a hypothesis. You can call it a theory. You can call it something else. You can't call it a law. Law of cause and effect is a law because there's not a single exception ever in the history of the human scientific endeavor. Now, when we look at the law of cause and effect, here's all it says. Every material effect has a cause that came before it and was greater than it. Now, let me repeat it back to you. Every physical material effect has a cause that came before it and was greater than it. Now, let me show you how well you know this. I've been illustrating this law in this way for years and years, and it's very simple. I'm going to put this devotional songbook on the end of the table. Now, suppose, this is hypothetical, work with me, but suppose you are sitting in the pew tonight, and you are listening in rapt attention. In fact, you're paying attention only to what I'm saying. You're not thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow. You're not thinking about what you're going to eat or the things that you didn't get done today that you needed to get done. All you're thinking about is what I'm saying. Now, like I said, this is hypothetical. I know that's not really how this works, but work with me. You're paying very close attention to me, and all of a sudden, this devotional songbook shoots across this room going 100 miles an hour and smashes into the back clock there on the wall. Your eyes get as big as saucers. You turn to me and you say, Kyle, what caused that? Now, what if I were to tell you, nothing, sometimes songbooks spontaneously shoot themselves across rooms at 100 miles an hour. It doesn't make any sense, does it? No, because you understand the law of cause and effect, that every material effect, what would a songbook shooting across a room be? Material effect. It has a cause that came before it, and that was bigger than it. Now, we'll get to the bigger than it part in just a minute, but let's look at that idea of before it. Do we have a material effect that we can see here in this world that has to have a cause? Yes, a universe. We have the universe that is a material effect that we apply the law of cause and effect to and ask the simple question, what caused the universe? Now, the atheistic proposition, the people who don't believe in God say, well, a singularity that exploded in what was called Big Bang. You say, hold on just a second. That singularity, where did it come from? You know, that's a great question. Because the fact of the matter is, we know that material stuff doesn't pop into existence from nothing. Now, there was a man, his name is Stephen Hawking. You might know Stephen Hawking. He is the late Stephen Hawking now. He recently passed away. He had Lou Gehrig's disease. He was in a wheelchair. He spoke through a computer-generated voice. If I understand it right, he had about 1 inch on his face that he controlled his chair with. By most everyone's account, he was one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists in the world. He had written a book years ago in which he said, yeah, we got a problem coming up with the universe because matter can't spontaneously generate, and so you could say God did it. That was decades ago. And his atheistic colleagues said, you can't do that. Said, you've got to write a book that clears that up because you can't leave any room for the idea of a creator. And so he came out with a new book. It was called The Grand Design. And in The Grand Design, he's wrestling with this law of cause and effect. And he says, hey, I recognize that we've got a material effect, the universe. He said, so we've got to have a cause for it. And here was his answer. Now, supposedly the most brilliant theoretical physicist in the world. He said, stars don't spontaneously pop into existence from nothing. He said, black holes don't spontaneously pop into existence from nothing, but whole universes do. Do you understand what he said? Supposedly the most brilliant scientific theoretical physicist in the world, he said the entire universe violated the law of cause and effect. Just popped into existence from nothing. Now, you ask the simple question, have you ever seen matter pop into existence from nothing? Not only does it violate the law of cause and effect, it violates the first law of thermodynamics. You know what the first law of thermodynamics is? The law of conservation of mass and energy. It's real simple. Take a log, set it on fire. Keep it in a glass ball. Okay? Before you set it on fire, there's a certain amount of matter and energy in the glass ball. After you set it on fire, how much matter and energy is in the glass ball? Same amount. It's in a different form. Now it's in smoke, ash, carbon dioxide, etc., but it's the exact same amount. Law of conservation of mass and energy says you can't add to or take away the amount of energy or mass in the material world. And yet, supposedly the most brilliant theoretical physicist in the world explains to us that a whole universe not only violates the law of cause and effect, but violates the law of conservation of mass and energy and pops into existence from nothing? Now, here's why that does not sit well with you. And it's why it didn't sit well with him. Because there's a very easy, common sense third grade level question you can ask that defeats the atheistic agenda. If there ever was a time when there was absolutely nothing, what would you have now? Nothing. You don't get something from nothing. Now, the atheists then, when they come to being stuck in this position, say, okay, well, your idea is not any better because you are suggesting that there's a God, and so what caused God? It's the law of cause and effect that says that everything has a cause that came before it and is greater than it. Then what caused God? It's a good question. But now you got to be careful how they pose it to you, because that's not what the law of cause and effect says. Now, the law of cause and effect is based on experiments we've done on what? Matter and energy. So, the law of cause and effect, if you listen close, says every material effect has a cause that came before it and that was greater than it. So, you've got to have something that was eternal, that was a first cause, but what can't it be? Matter. So it's got to behave not like matter, it's got to behave like something bigger than matter, like something more than matter, with better powers than matter. It's got to be like super matter. What's another word for that? Supernatural. Isn't that what we've been saying for years? We've got a God that is supernatural, that when you take the law of cause and effect, that applies to everything physical. The reason that that law doesn't apply to God is because nobody suggests that that God is physical. In fact, that God has always been viewed as a spirit which is more than matter. See, you've got to get something that can bring a world like ours into existence, because a world like ours has to have a cause. But a God like ours does not. Now, here's the second aspect of the law of cause and effect that flies in the face of atheism. You see, the atheist says that a singularity popped into existence from nothing and then exploded and brought the whole universe that we see here today into existence. The second aspect of the law of cause and effect says that the cause has to be greater than the effect. Now, you understand what I'm saying. Work with me. Go back to our illustration. Now we have our devotional songbook, and you are paying rapt attention to everything that I'm saying. You're not thinking about what you're going to eat. You're not thinking about the football game you're going to watch tomorrow. Okay, work with me. Hypothetical. It shoots across the room. You then, eyes big as saucers, turn to me and you say, Kyle, what caused that? Don't give me the nothing caused it. And I say, no, of course I'm not going to give you the nothing caused it. That's ridiculous. A tiny speck of dust landed on the end of the summer and shot it across the room. Seriously? A tiny speck, what's the problem with that? Not big enough, is it? You can't suggest that a tiny speck of dust landing under ordinary circumstances in this room is going to launch a songbook going 100 miles an hour. Why? Law of cause and effect. What's it say? Every material effect has to have a cause that came before it, and that was greater than it. Now remember what Romans 1:20 says. You can look at the things that you can see, even His eternal, He's always been here, power. Okay, now let's look at how big our universe is. You see, supposedly that singularity that popped into existence from nothing was 10 to the negative 26 centimeters across. What even is a negative 26 centimeter? Well, I'll tell you, it's something that you can only see with a very powerful microscope. That's supposedly how big the original ball of stuff was that brought into existence the universe that we see. How big is our universe? That's a good question. I can tell you. Kind of. And let me tell you what I mean by I can tell you kind of. I can tell you what the most recent estimates for the size of our universe are. Now, they get bigger every year, but I'm going to tell you what they are at the present. Okay, right now, we are a small to middle-sized planet, planet Earth, in the middle of a medium-sized galaxy. Now, if I were to ask you what galaxy we live in, you could probably tell me, yes, we live in the Snickers galaxy. Okay, the 100 Grand galaxy. Okay, no, the Milky Way galaxy. Of course, we get the Candy Bar galaxy. Now, we got pretty lucky. I don't know why we named ours the Milky Way galaxy. And like all the other galaxies out there, like Galaxy GX302F5, and so we've got the Candy Bar galaxy, right? All right, in our galaxy, people wanted to see how many stars there were. And so with Hubble telescopes and stuff, used to they thought you could count stars with the unaided eye. And several people like Tycho Brahe and Hipparchus and some of those guys, Kepler, thought they counted them. And they would give you numbers like 1,056, 1,005, 777, and they thought they got them all. 1,056, well, I've counted every one that's up there. Okay, with the kind of telescopes we've got now, they, before 5 years ago, they looked out into our galaxy and they said there are an estimated 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Now I'm going to give this to you for some shock and awe value. I don't expect you to remember it, and I only remember it because I have stated these facts hundreds and thousands of times, literally. But I'm going to give them to you because you need to understand the enormity of what we're dealing with. Okay, our planet Earth, you can put 1 million of those into the sun. The sun's a middle-sized star. So you can put 1 million Earths into the sun, middle-sized star. There are some stars out there that are 1,300 times bigger than the sun. So you could put 1,300 million, 1.3 billion Earths into some of those stars. Now, estimated 100 billion stars in our one galaxy, so think through this. How long will it take you to count to 100 billion? Well, if you got up every day of your life and you counted to 10,000 every day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, oh, and every single number you rattled off represents a star, many of which are 1 billion times the size of the Earth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. All those represent a star. You count 10,000 of them a day. Why in the world you would get up and count 10,000 every day, I don't know. But I use this. My son now is 15, but years ago, when he was our oldest child, he might have been the only child at the time. No, I think we had our daughter too, but he was about 4 or 5. And he would get up on Saturday mornings earlier than we would, and we would just, tell him to find something to do. One morning I got up, and he had been up this Saturday morning, and I said, "Drew, what'd you do today?" He said, "Well, I counted." I said, "What'd you count?" He said, "Nothing, just laid in my bed and counted." I said, "What'd you count to?" He said, 3,000. You ever got up on a Saturday, sun streaming through the blinds, you think, you know what, I'm gonna count to 3,000. I haven't. Personally, I never have. I've told that illustration for years and years. I had one other girl come up to me and she said, "No, I do. I get up sometimes and go, okay, nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you get up and count to thousands, more power to you. But let's say you did it every day. I don't know how long it'd take. You don't know how fast of a talker you are. Zig Ziglar says he talks at 220 words per minute with gust up to 440. That's about how I roll. But if you counted 10,000 a day, it's not going to take you 100 years to count to 100 billion. It's not going to take you 1,000 years to count to 100 billion. It's not going to take you 10,000 years. Now remember, you count 10,000 a day. Every single number you say, 101, 102, 103, represents some of them stars that are 500 million times bigger than the Earth, some of them 1.3 billion times. Every one you say, every one you count. It's going to take you 27,400 something years to count to 100 billion. And that's the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, one galaxy. Oh, no, it's not. I said that 5 years ago. Okay, about 5 years ago, they came out and they said, we got this wrong. Said our scopes that are looking out into our galaxy, what we just realized is there's a lot of dust in space. And so we're not really seeing all the stars out there. When you calculate for space dust, there's actually 3 to 4 times as many stars in our galaxy as we thought. Oh. So for years they said there were 100 billion, and in one sentence of one paragraph in one obscure journal that you never read, they said, no, there aren't 100 billion, there are probably 400 billion stars in our one galaxy. Okay, well, hold on just a second. Some of those 1.3 billion times the size of the Earth, Now ask yourself this next question. In a week, in a month, in 2 years, they'll probably come forward and say, we said 400 billion. Actually, it's more like 8. And then they'll probably come forward and say, we said 8 billion, 800 billion. It's actually probably more like 1 trillion. They keep moving it up. Guess what? It never does. It never goes back. They never say, oh, we miscounted. Actually, there's only 300. That doesn't happen. There's only 3. It just keeps getting bigger. Oh, but now here's the pertinent question, of course. How many galaxies are there? That's 400 billion stars, some of them 1,000 times bigger than the sun, in our one galaxy. So how many galaxies you got? Oh, they don't know. But I'll give you the estimate right now, 100 billion. The estimate right now is 100 billion. So if you count 10,000 every single day, and those numbers now don't represent stars, they represent entire galaxies, many of which have 400 billion stars in them apiece. It's now going to take you 27,000 years to count the number of galaxies. Give you just a little bit more information on this. Now, this was interesting to me because for years, I'd been standing up and telling people how big they estimated the universe to be. Now, I'm going to tell you that, and then I'm going to tell you what they changed it to in about last year and a half. Here's what they said for the last 15 years or so. They said, if you could, we can't do it, but if you could, go from one side of the universe to the other side. If you started over here and you were in a spaceship that travels the speed of light. Light travels at 186,302 miles per second. That's 7 times around the equator of the Earth in a single second. 1 Mississippi. That's light going around the equator 7 times. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, that's 14, 21, etc. 186,000 miles a second. Okay, a light year, if you ever watch Star Trek and they go to light speed, a light year is a measurement of distance, not of time. So here's what that is. That's how many miles it takes light to travel in a year. So if it's traveling 186,000 miles a second, how many miles would it travel in a year? That's a light year. I don't even know the number. It's really, really big with a lot of zeros behind it. All right, so if you were in a spaceship on this side of the universe and you were traveling at the speed of light, which is the fastest known speed that we've got, they told us that it would take you 43 billion years to fly across the universe. Take you 100,000 years just to get across the Milky Way galaxy. Oh, but then about 2 years ago, they came out and said, we've been saying 43. Actually, it looks like it's going to be more like 93 billion years to fly across the entire universe. If you could, of course we can't. 93 billion years. And then they said, and several people at Oxford think it might be 250 times that. 250 times 93 billion? Okay, hold on. Now let's go back to our law of cause and effect. It's been a while since we visited it, I know. Law of cause and effect says that the cause has to be greater than the effect. And we've got a 93 billion light year universe that's full of galaxies that many of them have 400 billion stars in them apiece that are 1.3 billion times the size of the Earth. And that came from where? A tiny singularity that supposedly popped into existence, and that singularity was 10 to the 26 centimeters across. You see the problem? You see, what we're told is that the science backs the idea that there's no God, but that's not true. The real science that we have, if you were to take the known scientific laws, what you then find out is that the known scientific laws validate a singular conclusion. There's an eternal superpower that is not matter. What we've been saying. There's a supernatural, all-powerful God. And that's what Romans chapter 1, verse 20 says you can know about God. And that's why the psalmist said, now we're not quoting this for evidence, although you could in a roundabout way. We're just quoting it to finish our point. The psalmist in Psalm 19, 1 through 3, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, night unto night utters knowledge. There's no language, there's no sound where their voice is not heard. You know what that means? That means that if you are an Eskimo and you live in the farthest northern places and you look up into the sky, you can know something about God. And if you are at the very southern tip of the furthest continent that there is, you can look up into the sky and you can know something about God. And that's why if we are honest every one of us knows that when there is a clear night and we are away from a lot of city lights and we look up into that majestic, star-speckled sky, there's something spiritual about the feeling you get when you realize there's something bigger than you. And that's what the psalmist was saying. And every one of us understands it. And there's no legitimate answer to it other than, in the beginning, God. Now, we'll give one more line of reasoning for this idea that there are some things you can know about the Creator. You can know His eternal power. And there's something else that you can know about the Creator. If you were to go to Hebrews chapter 3, you would look in verse 4 and you would read, "For every house is built by someone, but He who built all things is God." Now, simply put, that's the argument from design. The argument from design is simply this: when you see something that has intricate pieces all working together, you know there was an intelligent mind behind the construction of that. Now, it sounds almost kind of scholarly if you put it that way, but let's put it a different way. You walk into the woods, maybe you're going coon hunting one night and you got your flashlight and you look down, and right in the middle of the woods there is a pocket watch, old school pocket watch, that you hit the little side of it and top flips open, and you look down and it's got a face, it's got hands, and it's moving. You pop the back open and you see all kinds of gears and springs, and you see intricate design. What do you immediately think about that pocket watch? Oh, must have happened by random chance blind processes over multiple millions of years. Is that what you think? No, it's not what anybody thinks. Why isn't that what anybody thinks? Because you can look at stuff that happens by accident, and then you can compare it to that watch that happens from an intelligent designer, and you can see the differences. This is not something that is made up by a creationist to push the argument for God. It's something that every single person uses every day in their life. You walk on a beach and you look down, and on the beach there's a laptop computer. You pick the laptop computer up, you press the button, it comes on. What do you think about that laptop computer? Oh, multiplied millions of years, blind chance random processes here on the beach caused this to accidentally appear over a series of build-ups that got us this computer without an intelligent mind behind it at all. Is that what you think? Or do you look on it for the sticker that says, designed in California, made in China? That's, generally speaking, what you find on your laptop computer. Designed by who? Random chance processes? Now, let me go back to the debate in 1976. Thomas B. Warren and Anthony Flew. Thomas B. Warren is using this simplest but profound argument for the existence of God. Real simple. Whenever you see design, you know there's an intelligent designer. You use it every day if you're going to be honest. You see a car, you know it was designed by an intelligent person. You see a computer, you know it's designed by an intelligent person. You see a watch, you know it's designed by an intelligent person. You use it every day. This is not rocket science. It's everyday common knowledge. Now, Thomas B. Warren put a picture of a prosthetic hand up. This was in 1976. They didn't have PowerPoint. He would have, if knowing Warren the way he did things, he would have had the greatest picture for that today that you've ever seen. He probably would have had some animation come in and show all the tendons and muscles and stuff. Okay, this was a line drawing on an overhead projector. A lot of you kids don't even know what an overhead projector is, but that's okay. You probably don't know what a bag phone is either. None of that. That's all right too. Overhead projector is like a little light. You put this little clear piece of paper on this thing and project it up on the screen. Put a picture of a prosthetic limb, an artificial hand. And he said, Dr. Flew, did this hand have a designer? They've come pretty far way with some prosthesis. I've written an article. It's called a $4 million piece of evidence for the existence of God. Really interesting prosthetic limb. It's the whole shoulder all the way down to the hand. And now they've even come farther than this of late. This was probably several years ago now. A 26-year-old Marine, she lost her arm in a car accident, if I understand it correctly, and they put this 10-pound metal alloy arm on her shoulder and connected the actual nerves from her shoulder that used to go to her fingers to the motors on the arm. So they looked to see which nerves would have gone to the fingers. They stuck that on to innervate the prosthetic, the artificial fingers. Now, if I understand it correctly, they plugged it up and she would move her pinky. And then they realized, okay, no, wrong one. Yeah, that actually is for your thumb. So they got the nerves to where she could literally think about moving her fingers. And she did. And Dr. Kukin, the guy who was in charge of this research, said we've never seen anything like it in prosthesis ever. Said she can hold a jar of spaghetti with one hand, she can take a spoon with the other hand, and she can scrape out the remaining spaghetti sauce from the jar. Nobody's ever done anything like that in artificial limb history. Said she can fold a pair of pants without using a flat surface with just both her hands. Thomas B. Warren puts the picture of a prosthetic limb up on the screen. He says, Dr. Flew, did this have a designer? What's going to happen to your career as the world's leading atheistic thinker if you answer this question wrong? You're never getting invited anywhere, are you? I mean, there's only one thing you can say here. This is it. You can't say, no, I didn't have a designer, that happened by random. You can't do it. What's Dr. Flew say? He says what he's got to say. You know why he has to say that? Because every single day of his life, in every single instance where that question came up, design always demands a designer. Every time. Always. Dr. Flew, did this hand have a designer? Yes. Warren then puts up a picture of a human hand. Plain old, ordinary, regular human hand. Dr. Kukin, who was in charge of the research on that 10-pound metal alloy arm that cost $4 million to make, that's not counting the R&D that went into it, the research and development, cost $4 million just to create one of them. Dr. Kukin said, man, she can scrape out spaghetti, never seen anything, but it's still clumsy. Compared to what? Well, just compared to your hand. In fact, you have hooked to your shoulder something that's worth way more than $4 million. You didn't know you were that valuable, did you? At least not your arm. If you accidentally take a hammer and you smash your finger, let's say it's a pretty bad smash. You're hitting a nail and you smash that finger and it chips some of the bones and stuff off, like my friend did right here. Just hold that up. Look, just hold that up for everybody to see right there. You got a large finger that has just been smashed by a hammer. Now let's say that happens, hypothetically. Smashes some little pieces of bone. Do you know that your body immediately sends an enzyme down there to eat the little pieces of bone that no longer are going to be used to repair your finger? Think about that for a minute. Your body has an enzyme that eats bones. What happens when that goes awry? Well, you just wake up one morning, you don't have a bone in your arm? Well, you know what enzyme sometimes. Okay, no, it's got an enzyme that could eat every bone in your body, but it doesn't. It even knows which little chips of bone to eat away and which pieces of bone to leave that will be used to repair your finger. And then it starts repairing it, and within 6 weeks, although it might look a little crooked at the end of it, many times where your bone was broken and repaired, it's stronger at that point than the rest of your finger. Take a hammer, smash a finger on a 10-pound metal alloy arm, and wait 6 weeks and see what happens. You get a bill from somebody that says that's not covered by your insurance and you're going to have to pay for that out of pocket, right? It doesn't fix itself. You take a knife and you cut a wire on that metal alloy arm that is supposed to go to one of those motors, and that finger doesn't work anymore. What happens? It stays that way until somebody intelligent comes and fixes it. You take a knife and you cut something on your arm, and within seconds, your body sends down a 32-step chemical cascade that starts to clot your blood, but it only clots it in the exact location that you need it to clot. Because if it clotted anywhere else, it would stop your blood from flowing through your body and you would die. And it clots it perfectly right there, and then it starts to repair it. And within days, and then certainly weeks, it's repaired and you're not bleeding anymore, and the tendon or the veins or the capillaries or whatever were cut can now be used again. And you didn't think one thing about that process? Your body is just so well designed, it did it? And we've got a prosthetic limb over here that Flew had to admit was designed. You got to. And so then he puts a picture of a human hand, and he says, Dr. Flew, was this one designed? You know, he's got the same problem. He's only got one answer if he wants to stick to atheism. But he knows it's wrong. But he has to say it. And you know how absurd it looks. No, you just said this one that is clumsy compared to this one over here was designed. What do you got to say about this one if you're being honest? Dr. Flew, was this hand designed? No. How'd it get there? It just grew there, he said. That was in 1976. 2006, he wrote the book, There Is No God. The no actually is marked out in red ink to where the actual title says, There is a God, how the world's most notorious atheist became a believer. And he said, after 30 years of research, his mode of operation always had been that he followed the evidence where it led. And he said, when we started looking at the DNA genetic code that builds human bodies, it is so intricately designed, there is no possible way that you can deny that a designer with intelligence was behind its construction. In fact, Anthony Flew in '76, the world's leading atheist, says that modern science proves that there is a supernatural, all-powerful, intelligent deity responsible for the creation of this universe. You got two ideas. In the beginning was matter, and in the beginning, God. And one of those ideas is backed by every known scientific fact in the world. In the beginning, God. And so the question comes to you tonight, if that's the case, what does God expect of you? If there's a supernatural creator who put you on this earth for a purpose, just like he did everything else, what does he expect of you? You want me to tell you one of the tragedies of Flew's life? In the book, they asked him. They said, so you now admit there's a God? He says, yeah, he's 80-something years old. He says, yeah, I admit there's a God. They say, what God is it? He said, you know, I think that Christianity probably has the most credibility and the most evidence to support it. But I hadn't really researched it, and I'm probably not gonna. I'm gonna leave it to somebody else. And he died saying, there's a God. Christianity's probably true, but I'm not even gonna look into it. You know how far it got him? The book of James tells us, you believe that there's a God? You're doing great. Even the demons believe, and they trembled. And let me tell you why I travel the country talking to people about the existence of God. Because number one, it's my Christian responsibility according to 1 Peter 3:15. I'm supposed to always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks me a reason for the hope that is within me with meekness and fear. But number two, you have to get a person to believe in God before you can get them to believe in God in the flesh, Jesus Christ who came and died for them. But if they stop at God and they don't arrive at God in the flesh, do you remember what Jesus said? Unless you believe that I'm He, you're going to die in your sins. You know, there's more just to saying, hey, there's a God. There's something to saying, I know there's a God, and that's the most profound question that can ever be answered, and now I've got to know what that God wants me to do. And that God spelled out for us the plan of salvation that He put in the New Testament. We haven't had time tonight to go into it. I mean, we've been talking now for 15 minutes, and we just don't have time to go into that. I'm going to rattle it off for you because I think Everybody in here needs to know it if you don't, and you need more information on this. But God expects you to believe that He is, and that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. He expects you to believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son. He expects you to be willing to confess that with your mouth, to repent of your sins, to be buried in water baptism, just like Christ was buried, and to rise from that watery grave, just like Christ rose from the tomb, and you'll be a new creature coming in contact with the blood of Jesus through the waters of baptism. If you haven't done that, if you know there's a God but you haven't taken any steps, can you imagine being so close? Yeah, I know there's a God, and not going any further. If you need to get your life right with your Creator tonight, what better time is there? Tonight is the best opportunity and the only one you're guaranteed for the rest of your life. Don't waste it. As we stand and as we sing.